I always knew I didn't belong. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. In photos, I was the one half hidden behind someone else's shoulder. At dinners, I was the one clearing plates while my siblings toasted champagne. And at the hospital, I was the only one there, holding Dad's hand as he drifted between pain and sleep. They didn't even show up until the last 2 days. My brother, Julian, breezed in from LA, still smelling like his hotel cologne and nightclub smoke. My sister, Elise, waltzed in wearing sunglasses indoors, hugged the nurses, posted a grief selfie in the elevator, and left before midnight. I stayed. Through the coughing fits, through the long silences, through the soft-spoken regrets that only came at 3 a.m. when the morphine was low and the honesty was high. Dad would reach for my hand and say, I should have said it more. You were the one who stayed. They take and take. But you endure. I never asked what he meant. I didn't need to, because I had spent my life learning how to read between the words that no one dared to say in our family. They called me the serious one. What they meant was boring. They said I was reliable. What they meant was invisible. And when the funeral came, I dressed simply, stood in the back, and watched as they sobbed like they hadn't been absent for the past year of his decline. Elise threw herself dramatically over the casket. Julian gave a eulogy he had clearly found on Google. Mom sat stone-faced, not once looking at me. I didn't cry. I couldn't. Grief doesn't pour out when it's been quietly breaking you for years. It just settles in your bones, like cold. After the service, everyone gathered at the estate. I stayed behind to collect the photos, the condolence cards. I found a note tucked inside one of Dad's books. His handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. If they try to take it all, remember this? The truth is in the box. I knew exactly what he meant. The box sat in my apartment, unopened, heavy. He had given it to me 3 months before he passed. No instructions, no label, just a look in his eyes that said, keep it safe. And I did. When word reached me that the will was finalized, it wasn't from the lawyer, it was from Julian. He sent a single text, nothing left for you. Sorry. Should have smiled more, sis. That was him. Always the charmer. Even when he was twisting the knife. I didn't respond, didn't cry, didn't ask why, because I knew how they worked. For them. I was never part of the performance. Not loud enough, not glamorous enough, not marketable as part of the family brand. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. Until I saw the group photo they posted that night, Elise, Julian, and Mom, the ones who mattered most to Dad. They captioned it like a eulogy, like an obituary for me. And the world ate it up with likes and sympathy comments. Nobody asked where I was. And that's when something inside me cracked. Not like a fire, more like ice. Because the betrayal wasn't loud. It was silent, deliberate, coated in curated grief and practiced smiles. So I opened the box. Inside, there were 2 things. 1, a sealed envelope, labeled in Dad's handwriting. 2, to be delivered to Mr. Armand upon my death. Mr. Armand was his lawyer, the family lawyer, the man who had drawn up every contract, every trust, every final request. 3, 4, a USB drive with only one file, a video, of my father, recording himself on what looked like a hospital bed. 5, I plugged it in. His face flickered to life, gaunt, honest, clear-eyed. If you're watching this, it means they've already buried me. Probably planned it like a Broadway show. If they've told you you're not in the will, they're wrong. You're the beginning, the foundation. The only one who didn't flinch when it got hard. I made changes, late changes, legal, signed, witnessed. Let them laugh. Let them underestimate you. But when the time comes, show them who really knew me. I stared at the screen long after it went black. I could feel the sting of old wounds rising to the surface. But now they had names. Now they had weight. And I wasn't going to let them pretend I didn't exist. Not again. Not this time. The next day, I put on my best suit. Not for them, for him, for the man who, in the end, saw me clearly. And I walked into the lawyer's office alone. They were already there. Elise, Julian, Mom dripping in entitlement. They didn't even acknowledge me. I took the last seat, pulled the envelope from my bag, and slid it across the table to Mr. Armand. He looked at it, then at me. Then he smiled. Silence. Not the gentle kind, but the kind that arrives sharp like a blade cutting through air, expectation, and every smug little lie they whispered behind my back. Mr. Armand adjusted his glasses. Slowly. Deliberately. The envelope I handed him, still warm from my grip, sat like a ticking clock on the polished oak table. Julian shifted in his seat. Impatient. Elise crossed her legs, inspecting her manicure like we were wasting her time. My mother said nothing, but her lips tightened into that familiar line, the same line she wore the day she told me I was too stoic to be loved. Let's begin. The lawyer's voice broke the tension. Calm, almost amused. He unfolded the paper with precision. No theatrics, no hesitation. Before we proceed with the formal will, Mr. Bennett left an addendum, a legally binding supplement, signed and witnessed, to supersede all previous arrangements. Julian let out a dry laugh. What addendum? We already reviewed the final copy with him last fall. You reviewed a version, Mr. Armand said, flatly. This one was dated 8 weeks before his death. Elise sat up straighter. Mom's fingers tightened on her purse strap. I didn't move. This addendum begins, he continued, reading directly, with a personal note, dictated by Mr. Bennett. If you are hearing this, know that I died with clarity, with no illusions about who my children became, yes, and who stood by me when it truly mattered. The room chilled, and no one looked at me, but I could feel it, their bodies tensing, their grip on certainty beginning to slip. Mr. Armand paused. The following individual is to receive the first and primary share of Mr. Bennett's estate, including but not limited to the family home, the investment portfolio, the coastal property in Nantucket, and all residual holdings in the Bennett Trust. He looked up, right at me, to his eldest daughter, Emery Grace Bennett. My name shattered the silence. Elise blinked. Julian stared. My mother finally looked at me, and for once, she didn't know what to say. Julian stood. That's a mistake. Mr. Armand didn't even flinch. No. It's notarized. It's signed. It's final. He wasn't lucid. He was on meds. My father would never leave everything to her. He did. I turned my head slowly, met Julian's stare, but I didn't speak. Didn't blink, didn't give him the satisfaction of my outrage. Because this moment wasn't for him. It was for me. All the years they ignored me, talked over me, pushed me aside like I was some live-in nurse. All those nights I heard them planning vacations and investments without me. All those years boiled down to this exact moment. What about the rest of us? Elise asked, her voice thin, cracking. There are secondary provisions, Mr. Armand replied, but they are conditional. Conditional? My mother snapped. On what? The lawyer didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his folder and pulled out a small flash drive. He inserted it into the laptop on the conference table. Clicked twice. A black screen faded in, then flickered to life. My father's face appeared. Not frail, not dying, clear-eyed, resolved. Stronger than any of them had seen him in years. And then he spoke. If you're watching this, it means my death has stirred more interest in assets than affection. So let me make it plain, Elise gasped. Julian sat down. Emery, my daughter, who held my hand when I was weak, who brought me water when the others brought excuses, is the one I entrust to carry this family forward. You too, he continued, looking off camera. I love you, but I watched you circle me like vultures, whispering about real estate when I could barely breathe. I heard the calls. I read the texts. The screen cut to images, screenshots, texts, emails, voicemails. He's gonna die anyway. We might as well prep the split. Mom deserves more than Emery's stupid loyalty points. She's wasting her life playing nursemaid. Let's just smile and wait it out. My name, over and over. As if I were a problem to be managed. Not a daughter, not a person, just an obstacle to inheritance. Julian buried his face in his hands. My final wish, Dad's voice returned, is that my estate goes to the child who did not ask, but gave freely, who didn't scream for my money, but listened to my regrets. The screen went black, then silence. Not the awkward kind, but the reckoning kind. Elise was crying. Mom was staring blankly, lips trembling, trying to calculate a way out. Julian was just pale, like something fundamental in him had been exposed. I sat still, because I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for truth. Mr. Armand cleared his throat. To continue any portion designated for the remaining heirs is contingent on formal acknowledgement of the decisions made herein, and a signed statement forfeiting all future claims or disputes. You're joking, Julian whispered. It's non-negotiable. Mr. Armand replied. Then he turned to me. Miss Bennett, as primary heir, the timing and manner of disbursement is at your discretion. Shall we proceed? I looked at my family. No rage, no joy, just finality. Then I spoke for the first time. We proceed, exactly as he intended. There's a sound people make when the world stops turning for them. It's not a scream, not a sob. It's a low, guttural disbelief, like choking on pride that's suddenly gone stale. That's what I heard. As I stood up from the table, Julian was still frozen in place, hands gripping his temples like he could squeeze reality into a different shape. Elise wiped her tears furiously, smearing mascara across her cheekbones like war paint. And my mother, the matriarch who once ruled this family like a cold cathedral, was unraveling thread by thread, quietly mouthing words she could no longer command. I stepped away from the long mahogany table and turned to Mr. Armand. Can we schedule the full asset transfer starting this week? My voice didn't shake. It didn't need to rise. I had learned long ago that the loudest voice in the room is usually hiding the most fear. Silence, when sharpened well, cuts deeper. He nodded. Yes, Miss Bennett, the documentation is ready. We were only waiting on delivery of the sealed envelope. You've completed that. Good. I smiled. Then let's honor his timeline. He hated delay. I didn't look back at the others, because that moment wasn't theirs. It was mine. The first in decades where I wasn't being spoken over, where I wasn't the afterthought, where I didn't have to explain my worth. I had nothing left to prove. They, on the other hand, had everything to lose. That night, I walked alone through the gates of the family estate, no longer as the caretaker, no longer as the ghost in the hallway, but as its owner. The staff greeted me cautiously. They had seen too many comings and goings, but Mrs. Alcott, the housekeeper, who had been with our family since I was 10, met me at the stairs with tears in her eyes. He told me you'd come back, she whispered. He said if anyone deserved to walk through that door first, it was you. I placed a hand on hers. He was right, I said gently. But it wasn't about deserving. It was about remembering, because that's what they forgot Julian. Elise. Even my mother. They thought power was about possession, about names on paper and signatures on checks. But my father, in his final days, remembered what they didn't. Loyalty is louder than blood, and presence is a language far more fluent than performance. The following week was chaos. Papers flew, calls came in. Lawyers for my siblings tried to renegotiate, waiving old documents and ambiguous clauses like shields in battle. But every move they made, my father had already anticipated. The properties were no longer tied up in family trusts. He had quietly shifted them under direct ownership before he passed. The offshore accounts closed, consolidated, taxed, and repatriated. Even the beach house in Nantucket was sealed under my name with a clause they didn't catch transfer on death, dated months before he took his final breath. Every weapon they thought they had, neutralized. Their strategy had always been the same: outshine, outtalk, outmaneuver, but my strategy was silence, documentation, and a father's quiet redemption wrapped in legal foresight. Then came the press. A family shift that big doesn't go unnoticed when you're part of a semi-public legacy. Elise posted a filtered black and white photo with the caption, "Some people inherit land, others inherit lies." Julian followed with a podcast appearance, hinting at suspicious timing and manipulation during grief. They wanted the world to see me as the villain, but they had underestimated one thing: I had receipts. I released one letter, just one, a handwritten note my father had sent me 2 weeks before his passing, sealed, time-stamped, witnessed. You never asked for anything. That's why I'm giving you everything. Not out of guilt, but because you are the only one who didn't treat my life like a waiting room for their next upgrade. That letter spread like wildfire. And then I did something they never expected. I said nothing else. I didn't appear on camera, didn't retaliate, didn't defend. Because silence in the right hands becomes a thunderclap. Meanwhile, I made changes. I didn't throw parties, didn't redecorate, didn't make announcements. I reopened the community library my father once donated to rebuild it in his name, expanded its reach. I sat with his old war veteran friends and listened to stories I'd heard as a child but finally understood as an adult. I repaired what they had let rot in their chase for wealth, the people, the promises, the legacy. And as I walked the gardens one morning, I found something unexpected. A small plaque under the old oak tree, planted for Emery, my quiet anchor. I dropped to my knees, not because I was broken, but because I finally let myself feel. He hadn't forgotten me. He'd just been waiting for the right time to let the world see what he had always known. The final blow didn't come from me. It came from the lawyer. 3 weeks after the will was executed, Mr. Armand sent each of them, Julian, Elise, and my mother, a letter. Not a threat, not a cease and desist, just a final statement from the estate. A truth they couldn't rewrite. All future benefits, connections, and usage of the Bennett name or holdings must receive written permission from the estate's executor, Emery Grace Bennett. Unauthorized use will be considered a breach of legal covenant and will result in full forfeiture of all conditional provisions. Translation: they couldn't trade on the name they tried to steal. And now, they had to ask permission from the one they tried to erase. Me. Some people scream when they lose. Others negotiate. My family. They performed. Julian, the ever-polished golden boy, began hosting panels on financial resilience, pretending the collapse of his portfolio wasn't tied to the loss of my father's support. Elise pivoted to wellness blogging, selling grief as a brand, her captions soft-filtered with sadness and sage tea. And my mother. She vanished behind the curtains of our once bustling estate in Vermont, now reduced to a cold country shell without the backing of the Bennett Trust. They didn't just lose money. They lost the illusion, but I didn't gloat. Not once. Because I knew this wasn't about vengeance. It was about showing them that silence, when wielded with purpose, becomes power. A month after the will's execution, I hosted a private gathering. No press, no photographers, just the people who had actually been there. The gardener who used to sneak me peaches when I was 12. The nurse who read to Dad when I couldn't stay awake. Mrs. Alcott, our housekeeper, who knew more family secrets than any of them ever guessed. I didn't wear designer. I didn't give speeches. I simply opened the gates. And for the first time in years, the Bennett estate didn't feel like a monument to legacy. It felt like home. I walked the halls alone that evening, passing oil portraits of ancestors who never looked like me. Tall, pale, commanding. I'd always felt like the outlier in every room, too quiet, too grounded, too unwilling to barter my integrity for applause. And now their cold eyes followed me. As I passed with the keys in my hand, I stopped at my father's study, still untouched, still his. I ran my fingers across the leather armchair he loved, the globe he used to spin when he needed to think. Inside the bottom drawer, I found a notebook, a single sentence written in his hand, underlined twice. They thought silence meant absence, but you knew it meant watchfulness. That's what they never understood. They thought I had no fight in me, but I wasn't waiting to fight. I was waiting to finish, because while they were plotting how to divide what wasn't yet theirs, I was documenting, organizing, listening, and Dad knew, somewhere between his disappointment and decline, he saw what they didn't, that sometimes the child they overlook becomes the one they depend on when everything else burns. By the end of spring, the media storm had faded. People moved on to fresher scandals. But my siblings couldn't escape what lingered. Julian's business, once the crown jewel of his identity, had folded. He tried to launch a new venture but couldn't get approved for funding. Why? Because the Bennett family name was now trademarked under my ownership. Use without permission would be considered infringement. Elise lost her brand endorsements after several companies distanced themselves from the drama. The public liked her sorrowful aesthetic until someone dug up those old texts revealed during the will hearing. Let Emery babysit. I'm not cleaning up after a dying man. It circled Reddit threads for weeks, one by one. The doors they had built from charm and connections began to shut, and behind each of those doors stood me. Then came the letter, a handwritten envelope, postmarked from Julian. I opened it carefully, expecting venom, but instead I was wrong. About you, about everything. I didn't know Dad had changed the will. I thought I could control the narrative. But you controlled the truth. I know you won't respond, but if there's any way back, tell me. I folded it, placed it in a box, didn't reply. Because closure isn't something you hand out like forgiveness. It's something earned. 2 weeks later, Elise showed up, uninvited. I found her in the driveway, leaning against her car, sunglasses hiding everything she couldn't say out loud. I didn't come to fight, she said, voice brittle. I wanted to see if you'd answer. I didn't speak. I know I hurt you, and I know you probably hate me. Still, I said nothing. But I lost everything. I finally looked at her, really looked. The shimmer was gone, the arrogance too. What stood in front of me was hollow. You didn't lose everything, Elise, I said softly. You just lost the lies. She nodded, slowly, tears in her eyes. I don't know who I am without them. Then it's time you find out. And I walked away, because part of healing is knowing who deserves a seat and who needs to stand outside the gate. My mother never wrote, never visited, but I heard whispers that she tried contesting the will quietly through a private firm. They declined. Apparently, the paperwork was airtight, every clause signed, every timestamp valid. There was nothing left to undo. And so, she did the one thing I never expected her to do. She let go. No apology, no reckoning, just silence. I smiled when I heard that, because silence, at last, had come full circle. Now the estate is no longer what it was. The ballroom became an art studio for underfunded local programs. The guest house became transitional housing for young women aging out of the foster system. The library. It got a new name, the Emery Grace Center for Quiet Resilience, because that's what I wanted to leave behind, not just land or wealth, but a legacy of steadiness, of people who endure, of voices that may be soft but never again ignored. They used to say I was the quiet one. They were right, but what they didn't understand, what they never bothered to learn, is that silence is not weakness, it's preparation, it's observation, it's patience becoming strategy. And now, they say my name with a tension they can't hide, because it is the name they erased and couldn't kill. 6 months have passed, the estate is thriving. Not in the old way, not as a monument to elitism or old money grandeur, but as something real, lived in, honest. The halls no longer echo with power plays and passive aggression. They echo with children's footsteps, with laughter, with the sound of books being read aloud. One room over. We transformed the East Wing into a reading center, the back garden into an open-air study lounge, the wine cellar into a legal literacy program for young women. No one claps for it on social media, and that's exactly how I like it. Because this legacy was never meant to be seen, it was meant to be felt. Julian left the city, moved to Oregon, bought a modest cabin. I know this not because he told me, but because one of his old business partners reached out, asking if I'd consider restoring his name to the Bennett Trust. I said no, not out of spite, but because restoration requires something more than regret. It requires reckoning. And I haven't seen that in him yet. Maybe one day, maybe never. Elise moved to Paris. She sends postcards every few months, each one signed simply trying. And for her, I allow hope. Not reconciliation, not reunion, but hope. Because she came to the gate. She knocked. She didn't demand entry, she asked to be seen. That matters. As for my mother, I heard she sold the Vermont home. No message, no confrontation. She simply disappeared from the web of wealth and whispers she once ruled over. Some said she retreated to a monastery, others said she remarried. But deep down, I know the truth. She couldn't face what I became, not because it was monstrous, but because it was undeniable. I still walk the grounds at dusk, not because I miss the past, but because I want to greet it, on my own terms. There's peace here now, even in the stillness, even in the echoes of a girl who once tiptoed through these halls, trying not to be noticed. She's not hiding anymore. She's home. Last week, I was invited to speak at a foundation event. They wanted me to talk about legacy, about inheritance, about navigating public scrutiny while holding power. I declined the speech. But I sent them this. Instead, I wasn't born to impress. I wasn't raised to conquer. I was shaped by rooms where no one asked me to speak, and I learned to build my voice in silence. They took me out of the will, but that was their greatest gift, because it forced me to remember paper burns. Titles fade, but truth spoken quietly, held tightly outlives them all. Now, when people visit the Emery Grace Center, they don't ask about the scandal, they ask about the mission. They don't ask why I inherited everything. They ask how I carried it without bitterness. And I tell them, I didn't, not at first. There was bitterness. There was a hole where a family should have been, a wound shaped like a mother's approval, a silence that used to ache, because it wasn't chosen, but I turned it into something else. I took the silence they left me and built a cathedral of purpose, and I filled it with everything they never gave me. This isn't a revenge story, it's a resurrection, of a name they buried, of a daughter they misjudged, of a voice they never thought would rise above a whisper. But I rose, not to tower over them, but to walk past them. So let the world say what it wants. Let them tell it like I stole something. Let them whisper that I was cold. They're wrong, I wasn't cold. I was carved from steel. And when my father finally saw that he handed me everything, not just land, not just money, but truth. And when they sat at that long table, smirking, waiting to hear their names, he gave them mine. First,